Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Reimagining Influence to Grow the Next Generation of Leaders. My name is Jennifer Wolf, and I'm the Executive Director of the International Association of Industrial Accident Boards and Commissions, also known as the IAIABC. And yes, a lot of people call us the EIEIO Club. Today, our panel is going to discuss influence as an integral part of both career and leadership development. Building influence is really a soft skill that's just as important to each of us professionally as skill and experience building. I'm excited to welcome Christina, Amanda, Terrence, and Ryan, who bring together diverse experiences and perspectives to share with us during this conversation. Before we begin, there's a couple of things I want to share. This program is being offered as a part of the Transitions. Transitions is a grassroots initiative to help the workers' compensation industry transfer institutional knowledge and build and retain talent in the coming decade. This is something that every organization in our industry should be concerned about and proactively addressing. There are many ways for you to engage with Transitions. You can get involved by participating in the educational content offered. I would encourage everyone to download the worksheets that are included with each webinar. You can download both the slide presentations and worksheets to fill out along the way, and this will help you create your own plan for transitioning. In addition, you may be interested in participating in the mentorship program developed by Transitions. I would encourage you to subscribe to Transitions on LinkedIn. You can also utilize the Transitions YouTube to find recorded educational content and other great resources. Just a few words about mentoring. The Transitions is really encouraging the industry to embrace mentorship. Mentoring is a great way for professionals to enrich and advance their career goals. Mentor relationships share perspectives, problem solve, and can often lead to lifelong friendships. We are actively recruiting for both mentors and mentees. You can learn more on the Transitions LinkedIn page. I'd also encourage you to mark your calendars for upcoming educational content. Join us April 19th for a discussion of how to reimagine management featuring Amitros leadership. At its heart, Transitions is about proactively managing change. And that change is being experienced at the individual level, throughout organizations, and across the workers' compensation industry. A big element of that change and a big component of managing and harnessing the power of change is to have influence. I'm excited to introduce our panelists who have lots of good thoughts to share on the topic. I'm now going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves. But to help us get to know each of them a little bit better, I'm asking them to share one thing that's on their desk at home. And I'm going to start off, and I'm sharing that I've got a bottle of nail polish because last night I only had time to finish one hand of nail polish, and so I quickly did that before this webinar. So there you go. Amanda, how about you share?
Sure, thanks, Jennifer. So we're going to talk a little bit about where we started and where we are now. So I'm going to go way back. My first job was pollinating corn, and it has really given me a strong appreciation for the comforts of office life and especially air conditioning. So I think it was very well worth my time to go through that experience. Now I am an actuary by trade, but I serve as the Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer of SFM Mutual Insurance Company. We are a workers' compensation carrier in the Upper Midwest. I love to use data analytics to support decision-making and problem solving, and these passions really have served me well in my career. The numbers-driven industry is workers' compensation is a numbers-driven industry, and it's a really valuable skill set to have. So on my desk, I'm going to give a shameless plug for my company. SFM has a winter slip and fall, avoiding winter slip and fall campaigns, and we represent this by our little penguin here. So I like to keep that nearby to remind me to walk like a penguin in the winter, take small steps, and make sure that you're keeping your weight over your feet. Be safe, everybody.
Amanda, thanks for sharing that. And let's hope that spring is on the way because I'm ready for it. Terrence, how about you?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer. So a little bit about myself. My name is Terrence D'Souza. I am the Executive Director of Advanced Analytics at the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. I am the only Canadian on this panel, so you have a little bit of international representation. A little bit about my background. I've been with the Workers' Compensation Board of WSIB in Ontario for just over 20 years. I started out in the prevention side of the business, which is really where we work with employers to prevent the injuries that happen every day, and really try to make the workplaces safer. From there, I moved into actuarial. Don't ask me how, and was really working on developing experience rating programs for employers and helping them give rebates to employers who actually perform better than expected. Since then, I transitioned to strategy, and I've, for the last 10 years, been working on advanced analytics, which is really about enabling us to use data in more in the macro and micro way so that we can actually really deliver the value that we need to as an organization. I really believe that, we have to spend a lot of time developing the talent that we bring into the organization. So I really am interested in this panel and looking forward to this conversation, because I truly believe that the next generation is what's going to drive us forward, and we need to make sure that we're spending the time to bring them along and give them what they need. On my desk, I'm going to cheat. I actually have two things. So the first thing is, because of all day Zoom and Teams calls, I just have thumbs on my desk, because you're sitting in one place all day, just, you need something to make you feel a little better. And then for those of people who know me, I'm a very fidgety person. So I actually have two fidget spinners, and I stole these from my kids. And if you hear a lot of this in the background, that's just me playing with the fidget spinner, and it helps me focus. So thank you.
Thanks, Terrence. We're glad to be able to bring an international perspective to the transitions educational programming, and I'm well aware of the fidget spinners. They dot the landscape of my house, and I have to walk over them. So good to know what the background noise is from your office. Ryan, how about you?
Thanks, Jennifer. My name is Ryan Guppy. I'm Chief of Return to Work Partnerships here at Washington State Department of Labor and Industries. A little bit about my background. I started in our industry in 2003 as a vocational rehabilitation intern, and from that point moved into working as a team member on an interdisciplinary team, working with people that are struggling with chronic pain issues. And from that perspective, from that place in my career, I was tapped by Vicki Kennedy back in 2013 to reimagine vocational rehabilitation and make good on our agency missions and goals. I've got some training in the Progressive Goal Attainment Program. I have a credential as Certified Disability Management Specialist. I've been involved with the IAA for a number of years at this point in time, and just what I have on my desk is a kind of similar in the same vein as Terrence. I have a jar of multivitamins, just because we've been sitting here cooped up for so long, and we've got to do all we can do to kind of grasp at health these days. But what I was really considering doing was filling up a martini glass with prune juice as a homage to Bob Wilson, who just posted on his blog from workerscompensation.com a little bit about his journey and his knee replacement surgery that he's currently recovering from. So I don't want to be accused of drinking on the job, so I decided to go with the men's once a day instead. So there you have it.
Well, Terrence and Ryan, we clearly know who are the seasoned, panelists of today's crowd, and I'm glad to know both of you are really trying to maintain your health in your advanced years. So, sorry, I couldn't help it, Ryan. But finally, I want to end with Christina, who has the most years until she can retire on the webinar today. So Christina?
Thank you, Jen. That's a very kind way to say that I'm probably the youngest professional on this call. I started my career, I fell into association work. I'm currently an account executive with AMPT Association Management. I actually started working for the IIBC several years ago, and so I do have a work comp history from that experience. And then found myself engaged in the American Society of Association Executives. It's literally an association for associations. And I had served many years in their Younger Professionals Committee. I led that committee for a few years. And after that, I found myself in a new role, which I have now, which is I lead a few associations. One of them is a sports group. I'm their executive director. And the second one is the Academy of Geriatric Physical Therapy. I am their executive director as well. And to bridge it all together, when someone gets hurt, unfortunately, maybe in your states or provinces, they will hopefully get PT with my members in the Academy of Geriatrics Physical Therapy. So thank you all for being here today. My thing on my desk is actually a picture frame. It says, "You're a human sparkler." You are. The reason I have this on my desk is it's been on every desk I've ever had. I got it in college from a dear friend, and it just got framed and has been moving from desk to desk to desk ever since. So thank you.
Well, I'm looking forward to this conversation. We had a lot of fun on the prep calls, and let's just dive in. And let's start by talking about this concept of influence. What does it mean, and how is it important, and why is it important for us to think about building and growing influence in our careers? And since Christina, you confessed to being the youngest on the group, I was hoping you might share your perspective about why influence, how that shaped your early career.
Thank you, Jen. So I'll start by saying being the youngest in meetings like this is all I've actually really known. Those that I lead and manage now are almost all older than me. I manage boards and almost everyone's older than me on those. So it's something I have been a part of, and really I'll start by answering that question, which is, what does influence mean to me? And it really is about that affecting change piece that Jen mentioned earlier here. And what kind of change are we talking about? As the person, that may represent the younger professional in the meeting, that would be things like growing in your career, or perhaps making connections in the industry that one may work to be able to influence change in the future. The most obvious thing here is that the younger professionals in your industry, at your offices, in your careers, at the associations you may be members of, those are the future leaders of the organizations and companies that we're talking about here. I will never forget, I attended a conference many years ago. This is probably my first large conference. There's 5,000 people in the audience, and someone on the stage said, "Look around at the people here in the room. Find the youngest person that you see next to you. In about 15, 20 years, they're going to be the ones probably on this stage." And it was one of those moments where I thought to myself, this is the beginning of probably something greater, and what that can mean for the people who hopefully are serving with a lot of experience and passion in all those industries that we want to serve.
Thanks, Christina. And I think that idea of, as a younger professional at the beginning of their career, having goals and understanding how influence can be leveraged to reach those goals is really critical. So Terrence, you are on the opposite spectrum. You're a leader of an analytics group at WCIB, and tell us about what influence means from your perspective as a manager.
Thanks, Jen, and really thank you for all the old jokes. It's interesting being on a panel with so many younger people. So as a leader, I think from my perspective, having influence and building influence skills is critical to your success. Leadership is really about bringing people together towards a shared vision and goal. It means working with people, building rapport and building trust, and helping people get to what they're trying to achieve. I mean, that's what we're all trying to do as a leadership team. To be successful, you really have to be intentional about growing your sphere of influence. And one of the ways you do that as a leader is it's really about extending trust to the people that you work with. So for me, it's really about empowering my team and allowing them to be successful and make their own decisions. I know we talk about workers' compensation, and Amanda said, you know, we are a numbers business a lot of times, but we are mainly a people's business, you know. So whether you're a case manager helping a person with an injury get back to work, or you're just someone like myself working with a colleague on a new initiative, it really is about building those relationships, influencing people so that you can get them to work towards a common objective. And if you're successful in doing that, you will be successful in your career.
Terrence, I think that that's such a meaningful comment, that yes, we are driven by data and process, but at the heart lies a bunch of relationships with people, some of whom have undergone a traumatic injury or some other kind of trauma experience, and they're hurting and they need help. And influence is critical in building that trust and moving those individuals back to health and function. Ryan, I wanted to chat with you. You run a vocational recovery unit at LNI, and one of the things that we talked a lot about in our planning call was how leadership and influence are linked. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important, and perhaps what might be lacking in our industry with respect to influence and leadership?
Sure, Jennifer. So kind of building off of what Christina said, I was that younger person in the crowd, 15 years ago. So what you said is absolutely true. I'm 47 years old right now, and I've been through that, and I know what it feels like to have to kind of look for ways to influence and fit in, if you will, into the bigger scheme of things. And for me, taking a cue from Terrence, it really comes down to, I think, if you want to be influential, you have to have that influence be connected to something that's kind of a greater cause, if you will. And I said this in our planning call, like you alluded to, is like I don't know a whole lot of people who decided that when they're choosing the educational path they wanted to go to, and if that was part of their journey, that work comp was at the end of that journey. Now I know people like Amanda who corrected me during our planning calls. Well, actually, I was one of those people because I really like the data and I really like that piece. And so for the actuaries in the crowd, I apologize. But generally speaking, in my day-to-day, most people I talk to fell into work comp. And I think that's kind of a signal to our industry. We should pay attention to that in order to reimagine our industry and in order to really make it what it should be, and going back to its roots, is it's a helping profession. We're here to help people. We're here to help people recover. We're here to help businesses recover, and we're here to help them avoid risks and unnecessary risks. And I just don't know if we have an industry standard or a just cause that really wants to attract people to our industry and play that leadership role in influencing others towards that end. And so for me, when I think about in the aggregate what's attractive about our industry, I don't know if there's really something that jumps out. I don't think there's anything that's really calling people to want to participate in it. So I think that's one of our biggest challenges.
Thanks for that perspective, Ryan. And I think perhaps one thing that might be missing is leaders with influence who are passionate about that human aspect, and who are passionate about and can bring together, as Terrence said, people with this shared vision that our industry is really about humanitarianism and, you know, bringing together and solving people's challenges, not problems, challenges. Amanda, I wanted to talk to you about how do you think that leaders with influence improve our industry or can improve our industry?
Thanks, Jennifer. So it's important, I think, to first recognize that people work to build influence for different reasons. And a lot of people do it to achieve some kind of greater good, which is what we're seeking here. But some of them do it for power or money. And if you look around and you figure out that you are the one with influence, you get to, you know, your mid-career and you've established that influence. I think it's so important to make sure that you use your superpower for good. And I love using that term superpower because I really think that that's what it is. You've worked to build that power and you should use it for good. So there's a couple different ways that I think you can use that power and really come to some good conclusions. And it's based around seeking out opinions from others around you to bring those best ideas back to be heard by decision makers. It is not ever a single person path to making the world better. We need to do it together. And so in order to do that, you have to surround yourself with others that have different opinions, backgrounds, perspectives, not those that are the same as yours. And oftentimes that comes from different areas of the company, different age groups, different racial backgrounds. There's so many different ways that you can seek out those different perspectives. And once you do that, you can really challenge yourself to think differently. You're going to have an innate opinion about how you might go about doing something, but once you challenge yourself to think differently, you can then challenge others to think differently, and that's when change really starts to happen. And I think that gets back to some of Ryan's discussion about how do we get there? How do we get to a place where we're starting to think differently? And it's about bringing in additional perspectives.
I love that. I think that's the hashtag for this session, Amanda, is influence as a superpower. And I think that being able to leverage influence by building trust and bringing together that diversity is something that every organization can benefit from. On that perspective, from an organizational perspective within your companies, what opportunities do you provide to grow influence? And then how does your organization benefit from that? Terrence, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at WSIB?
Thanks, Jennifer. And I do want to call out Amanda. I love that. I think the analogy of influence as a superpower really resonates with me. And I do think you're also enabling other people to exercise that superpower, then increases that for you too. At WSIB, one thing that I learned long ago from the people that influenced me the most early in my career was to give the opportunity to people to show what they can do. I was lucky enough to have people I worked with early in my career that really put me in opportunities that I know when we were on this call, I joked about, I really didn't belong in, right? Because I was talking to leaders that I had no business talking to. And I really learned from that experience, and it really helped me grow as a person, but also helped me grow in my career. So I really, at the board, I've really tried to do that myself. So a simple thing that I try to do as much as possible is that someone who does the work actually presents it. So no matter who they're presenting it to, it could be all the way up to the senior leadership team. It could be, just to the team itself. But keeping them involved in that and having them present that is one of the things that I found very helpful. Now, they're not always comfortable with this, and you have to also recognize that when you put them in this position, that is sometimes uncomfortable for them. But that's where my role as a leader comes in, is to help them and coach them and really work with them through that process. Another thing that I do is I bring people along for meetings that they really shouldn't be in, and you just have them sit in, listen, get FaceTime with some of the leaders. Actually helps them build not just an understanding of how people think, but also gives them FaceTime, so when they pass that person in the hallway, if we ever return to the office, they can say they actually can put a name to a face and have that conversation with them. So being very purposeful in how you build that. And one last thing I'll say is, I've always tried to give people stretch assignments. So we had this conversation in our prep call, and early in my career, I was always asked to do things that, and I said I was put in situations where, can you do this? And I look at it and I'm like, yeah, I don't think I can do that. But I'd always say yes, and then go figure it out. And I try to do the same thing with people that I work with. So I'll give them things that they probably don't know how to do, but that's okay, right? I wouldn't be giving it to them if I didn't believe that they could do it. And I work with a lot of young people now, and what I find is you give them the right opportunity, give them the right coaching, it pays back in spades. And we also do this with co-op students in the organization, where we give them projects, and at the end of the day, at the end of their co-op term, we have them present that either to the leadership team or to the smaller team to help them. Now, why is this important to us as an organization? Well, WSIB is a large company. We are competing with multiple different organizations for talent at any given day, right? We are trying to bring the best of the best in. I can't compete with the Googles and the Amazons and all of those of the world. And I'm in the analytics field, so the talent that I'm looking for is really, really hard to find. So what is my competitive advantage here? It's for me to help you grow your career, help you learn as an individual. And if that means you leave up and go to something else, that's okay. But it's really about investing in the talent. We spend a lot of time recruiting people in, and it would really be a shame if we don't spend that time developing them to the potential that they can deliver on, and let them just, stay in that same role forever, even when they have so much to bring. That's what I think it is for us as an organization. It really is about the future.
And Christina, I think that you might have some perspective on that, especially what Terrence talked about in terms of growing in your professional career, and then seeking on that next opportunity. Other thoughts you might want to share?
Yeah, and this is specifically around the question that came through, which was how can leaders avoid, nepotism or favoriting individuals, especially ensuring, diverse perspectives and inclusiveness in those mentorship pieces. And there's really a few elements to that. One would be just general awareness around what biases as an individual you may have. You can't actually bridge the gap between them unless you know about them first, right? That's avoiding that denial basis, right? And once you're aware of those, there are many things you can do. A simple one would just be intentionally not asking the same person. I mean, that means also taking some risk, because I know that there's a comfort in going to the same people and same group of individuals to serve in those roles and meet those needs. But by taking risks and having others perhaps meet those objectives you may have, you may learn something new. Someone else has a different perspective to bring that you had never even considered. And it might also be something where that individual has an opportunity to quote unquote fail, but they learn from those failures too. So just think about first, like where some of those biases you may be bringing into that, and then intentionally as the leader, think about how you can reroute your path and think about the system you go about when you start identifying those to help you, and put that system 2 in your brain turned off to back to system 1. So system 1 is like, okay, autopilot, here we go. Systems 2 is like, oh, I'm thinking about something different and I need to trigger a change here. So systems 2 processing for, okay, let's change this pattern.
Thanks, Christina. Ryan, what's your perspective on providing opportunities for growing influence within the Washington Department of Labor and Industries? What do you offer your employees, and how have you benefited from perhaps opportunities to build influence?
Great question. So I have so many things to add on to what Terrence and Christina just said, but we just don't have time to do it, unfortunately. I think from a practical standpoint, number one, always starting with why. Why are you doing what you're doing, and how is that connected to the greater cause? And I think that if you do everything from that perspective as your true north, if you will, then you don't have to be as worried about managing people. You can actually help lead them. And I think we fall into this trap of wanting to have our thumb on people because we're afraid they're going to do something that we don't want them to do. And guess what? They probably will if they're greater cause isn't aligned with ours, but if it's aligned with ours, then the amount of risk goes down substantially. And so I think you have to have that mindset before you even venture out to say, how can I grow this? So you have to be comfortable with taking that risk, but you have to be able to mitigate against that risk by making sure you're starting from a common place. And for me, it's like humanity, compassion, science, and action are kind of at the core of how we perpetuate and grow that. And how we do that is really making it safe to challenge the status quo. Got a great data story about that if we have a moment in our return to work data about how I was given the permission, because I have a brave leader, Vicki Kennedy, to challenge the status quo internally up against hard facts and data. And it was just a great opportunity that kind of opened the doors for everything that's unfolded here in Washington State. But in a day in and day out basis, in order to continue to attract the types of professionals that I'm looking for my vocational recovery program, we know that we have to, number one, make sure that we're attracting them for the right reasons, right? If you attract people for the right reasons, then when a pandemic happens and everybody has to work from home, you don't get people complaining and demoralized because we can't pay for their internet. They just pay for it because they're making a sacrifice to be part of this, right? So all this is really built off of that kind of a foundational understanding, and you have that kind of a culture to begin with. But more importantly, from a risk or from a courage perspective, as management, we recognized that our vocational service specialists internally didn't have a growth and development ladder. We didn't have job classes. We had one. Everybody was the same, and that was it. So there was really nothing to aspire to. And there was no mechanisms in place for us to be able to influence and grow those people. So we took the lead role on, number one, addressing a number of those issues. We took the lead role and we brought the union in on it. It wasn't led by them. We started that, and that was a risky and that's a scary thing. We also took the lead on making sure that we positioned ourselves in a way to challenge the status quo, and as a public agency, help pay for my staff and people like me to be part of organizations that are in the public and private sector, like the IAIABC, or in Washington, the Washington chapter of the International Association of Rehabilitation Professionals. We pay for our staff's membership in those on an annual basis if they're interested in doing that. That's a way that they can hear me talk about the craft of vocational recovery and go out into the community and participate in those other communities to help spread that influence about what our greater good is and redefine what it is we're trying to do in work comp. We're not trying to cut closed cases. We're not trying to mitigate risks. We're not leading with that. We're leading with humanity and compassion, and we're doing it in a evidence-informed kind of a way with some actionable approaches to do it. And so when you build a professional job class and then you provide the tools for people to grow their professions, coupled with the right kind of leadership, and you foster a work environment that has a lot of psychological safety, which means, going back to Christina's point, it's not about making people comfortable, it's about making people feel comfortable when they're uncomfortable. And if you have an aligned true north and a just cause that you're always coming back to that's driving it, you don't have to manage people. Everybody gets to start leading each other. And I don't mean that necessarily from a positional standpoint. I mean that from a peer-to-peer standpoint. And that's when you really know that you're hitting it out of the park, when you start seeing leadership in non-positional positions moving and advancing your just cause.
Ryan, I think that what you are talking about goes back to some other comments that the other panelists made about really having a culture of trust, and that trust is really foundational to having influence. Your colleagues have to trust you, your peers have to trust you, your leaders have to trust you, your managers have to trust you. And I think, to kind of tie those concepts together, Terrence and Ryan, you were able to demonstrate that building influence can happen in a lot of different ways. You can find opportunities within your organization, letting people present their work, getting them in front of executives. You can also identify opportunities outside of your organization, allowing them to participate, Ryan, as you said, in these professional organizations and having volunteer opportunities. But the common thread that I hear from all of you is that you have to be intentional. You have to be deliberate about it. And this has to be a part of both your own career path, and it has to be a part of the career path of the individuals that you supervise and that work under you. And so I think that that's really important, and it's something that I would encourage the attendees who are listening in today, download that worksheet that you have available to you and start filling out those opportunities, brainstorming amongst yourself about where internally and externally you might be able to build influence to take that next step in your goal attainment. Ryan, you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think there's another dynamic too that's super important, and this is a credibility component, which I think is important if you're trying to influence people, and that is you have to be able and willing and comfortable with failing and acknowledging when you fail. So I think that's humility is super important in this, and I also think you have to be comfortable with hiring and surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you and not being threatened by that. And if you're able to do those things, I think your pathway on how you want to grow and advance influence within your organization will start to naturally unfold and evolve. So it can be an easy journey. It takes a long time to do this stuff, but again, I'm the first one to admit in a meeting with my staff, I made a mistake, and that's okay. And I think we should be more comfortable with saying I did something wrong, but do it quicker, fail faster, and be okay with that, and like thrive in that. And we work in a risk-adverse industry, and the notion of failing faster is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. But when it comes to influence and culture change, then I'm recommending there's a really good home for that dynamic to live there within the context of our industry.
Absolutely. Terrence, you wanted to share?
I was just going to add one last piece to what Ryan said, and then I'll stop. It was really about Ryan's comment about failing, but I think one thing that we always forget is acknowledging the people that actually made you successful. So what I mean by that is a lot of times it's my team that has done the work, and calling that out in the right moment when you're presenting to whether it's the executive team or the board, and acknowledging the team that has actually put in the effort to get us where we have. I think we as leaders forget that very often. And being very thoughtful about that really builds the trust within your team, because they can see that you're giving them the recognition that they deserve.
I see lots of nodding heads on that topic. So Terrence, thank you. So we have all discussed that influence is important. It's important in a lot of different ways, and it benefits our organization. But carving out the time and resources for these opportunities is certainly an investment. Amanda, could you speak to some of the challenges or barriers that might have to be overcome in opening up some of these types of opportunities?
Sure, thanks, Jennifer. That's a great question. So I think that there's a couple of them, and I'm sure Christina will expand upon more here in the next few minutes. But the first that I think stops people from actively working to build influence is fear of failure, stepping outside of your comfort zone. Because in order to do that, you have to go talk to people you don't know, and you have to attend things you've never been to before. And it is intimidating to step in that room for the first time when you know that everyone else feels like they already know each other. They're connected, they're familiar. And you have to recognize that that whole group of people can learn just as much from you with your fresh perspective as you can from them. At the same time, it's intimidating to start asking questions in a group setting and to have these things come out and put yourself out there in ways that you hadn't before. But if you're having questions, or if you want to enter a situation like that, other people do as well. Bring people along with you, bring that partner along with you to those different events as well, and just take the leap. So I think comfort zone's a big one. Secondly, I think that it is possible that you may be worried about what others perceive that your intentions are. If you start trying to get into different meetings or start attending things where you weren't invited to before, for example, what are your intentions, and are they peer or are you power hungry kind of thing? And I think if you're actively worrying about what people think about your intentions, you're probably already on the right road, because that means that you most likely do have that ethical perspective of getting to the right place. Just if you're seeking out that greater good, as Ryan talks about, that just cause, people will recognize that your intentions are pure and they'll follow too. So just know that you shouldn't worry so much about what others think, because if you're intending to head down that right road, other people will recognize that as well.
Thanks, Amanda. Christina.
Yeah, thanks. And to build off of that, I think another element of this, we touched on it a little bit, but I think it's much larger and important to really put on its own, which is just financial and constraints in time. So keep in mind that as you kind of look back in your own careers, for those of you who are currently in those leadership positions, and for those of you who are the younger professional now, there are different constraints on younger professionals. And I'm generalizing here, but typically constraints on financial resources. Many times they're paying off student loans, they've maybe just bought their first house, or they're starting a very young family. Potentially, or they, not only those financial resources, but different kinds of resources with time if they have a younger family or someone they may be caring for. You know, those are all elements of barriers to be aware of. And so an example of this would be, so I became a certified association executive at a very young age. I was, at the time I earned mine, there was only 3% of all CAEs in our industry, which are thousands, that were under the age of 35. And a part of that was there's a financial commitment in order to become certified. Many of us have to take educational courses, got to pay filing fees with boards, and part of those credentials really play in that influence and show that, you know, you're a player at the table because you've done the education work, right, to educate yourself from a professional development standpoint. And I will tell you, quite frankly, I could not have done it on my own. It's expensive. And so I was grateful to have support from the employer I had at the time to support this education, you know, the travel to get there as well, and then the time off of work in order to support those. So while they may seem little, they are very big barriers, I think, that we need to kind of call out. And I'll also say things like many times in order to participate, there's also an expectation to give money, either in a foundation capacity or at a reception, or that evening sort of like, let's all get together element. And those are areas too where they may not seem like a big deal to the majority of the people who have been doing it forever, but it's something to be aware of. And so just like to Amanda's point, like knowing the players in the room, this is an opportunity where to break down some of those barriers, bring someone along with you, like do the shoulder tapping. That's how I got here, was someone kind of tapped on my shoulder and continue to nurture that over time. I call them my career champion, you know, people who are there for either a season, a reason, or like your lifetime of your career. Those are big pieces in that togetherness of, you know, trust and growth and influence.
Thanks, Christina. It's really important that people understand there can be barriers, especially these financial and time barriers. And so trying to play with, you know, being cognizant of that, being aware of it, and breaking barriers down for when you have the ability to do that. So we're coming up, we have about 15 minutes left in the webinar, and I just want to let everyone know we would welcome your questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. As we start to end the conversation, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to share an example of how they have grown influence within their own career, and what came of it, and what did they learn from it, and how has that been beneficial to them. And I will start with Terrence.
I knew you were going to start with me, Jen. So I'll give you I already said, I think one of the ways that I grew influence as I built my career was taking on the opportunities that were really difficult, and I probably had no business doing, but saying yes to them and then figuring out how to get it done. I will caution that with saying you have to get it done. So, you know, delivery is an important part that people don't talk about. Part of building influence is people need to rely on you, that you can deliver as promised and have the ability to work through those barriers. And that is, I think people underestimate how difficult a thing that is, but you have to figure out a way to, you know, get to the finish line. Who do you need to work with? How do you get everybody on board? And that is part of your influence in building skills. But delivery is, I would say, one of the key things. And as a leader, that is my expectation as I'm building my rank and file below me. I'm giving you the opportunity. I will help you get there. I will coach you, but I am looking for you to actually deliver the outcome that I'm asking you to. And if you're running into the problems or you're running into the challenges, then it's the opportunity for you to come to me and I can help you and provide you with the resources that you need. But that delivery piece is very important. And that's how you build your influence, because then people know that they can rely on you. And then they will come back to you again and again and again to get that next project done or get that next problem solved, etc. I will give you one more shout out, and I'll say that one way I've done it in the last few years is IIBC. I think it has really given me the opportunity to build my influence outside of the small little province of Ontario and really get to know some of the players across the US for sure, but even globally. So I think that was another way that I've been able to, so associations and other partners like that.
Well, thanks, Terrence. Appreciate the plug for the IABC. And there are many professional organizations within the workers' compensation industry that really do provide a valuable place to build influence and to build networks. Amanda, how about you share with us how you've grown influence within your career?
Yeah, so I'm going to go way back to the start of my career when I had no influential capital built up. And when I first started as an intern at my current company, so I've been here throughout my career, I joined nearly every internal committee that the company had. I was involved in planning employee events, charitable drives, health initiatives, you name it. And through that, I met others across my organizations, built friendship and trust. And eventually I chaired some of those committees, which was another leadership opportunity for me. But in the end, what that's led to today is that I have a network within my organization of trusted contacts that I can leverage whenever I have questions, concerns, ideas, and they don't just all exist within my team or within my immediate circle. They're throughout the company, which is so important when you're looking for additional perspectives, as I mentioned before. So that was just one way as a very young professional that I chose to get involved in a bunch of different things and built my network that way.
Thanks, Amanda. And Christina, how about you? You want to share an example?
Sure. Here's an example that I always look to, and I shared it with our team when we were planning this call, which is this is where you, as a younger professional, and then think of it as a scenario where if you're the leader in this meeting, how your role will be played out here, where you have to be prepared and take advantage of the opportunities when they come to you. There's this balance between luck and work, right? And in those luck situations are where just take advantage of it as it comes. So an example is that I had, this is younger in my career, probably 5 years ago now, where I had the opportunity to attend a very exclusive networking and education program. It was several days long. It was fully compensated by the sponsor of the program, but it meant I was out of the office several days and I had to get permission and all these things. But attending that also meant that I missed out on some personal things in my life too. So I knew that going was a big commitment professionally for me. So if I was going to go, I was going to make the best of it. And I found out that attending that event, there's about 20 younger professionals in this meeting and 5 mentors that coach us throughout the program. And one of those coaches happened to be the board chair of an organization of 40,000 members. It led the industry. And I said, if there's anyone who's got influence in this room, it's that person. And his name was Scott Wiley, and he was the board chair. And I said, I'm going to meet Scott. I don't know anything about him except he's the chair, and I'm going to make time to meet him. And so it just so happened that we were at a social event, and you get on a bus and you drive like 40 minutes to Tahoe. And he was looking for a seat, and I had a seat. So I waved my hand and said, Scott, come sit by me. And I had 40 minutes of his undevotional time, just dedicated to me. And it turned out from that meeting, I'm looking for a mentor. He connected me to this next person who I currently now work for. So long story short, know who's in the room and make the best of your time and the opportunities that you have, because you won't expect how they come to be.
I think, Christina, that point of of taking advantage of the opportunity, but you also did your research and you knew who it was you wanted who you was going to further your goals. And so you have to do both, right? Rely on a little luck, but also be armed with the knowledge to take advantage of it when it comes to you. Ryan, how about you share an example of growing influence within your career?
Sure. So I'll use one that's very recent, and it has to do with this multi-year vocational recovery project that has actually become more of a cultural movement than a project, so to speak, in the traditional sense. And I think it starts with, again, being comfortable with knowing that you don't know all you need to know, and that you absolutely need other people in order to ensure that you're doing it in a way that, number one, there's buy-in, and number two, you're avoiding some of the pitfalls, right? And so part of my unit here, as you referred to it, is really just a core group of a few people who were at the core of developing the vocational recovery project. And at one point in time, and so I guess this is an illustration of the law of diffusion of innovation. So that's where you start small and build some momentum, and it grows pretty quickly. So what we did was we put the feelers out with the private sector community, and the vocational recovery project was one of the first projects that I'm aware of that the agency undertook, where there were more people from the private sector involved in it than there were at the department. So we have over 400 private sector vocational providers that work for about 40 different companies. That really represents the true workhorse, if you will, behind the data that you've maybe seen Vicki and I share. And at one point in time, we had over 100 different individual providers and firms at the table with us, collaborating and reimagining what it could look like to actually breathe life into our agency mission, which is keep Washington safe and working, but more importantly, our agency goals, which is help injured workers heal and return to work. And how can we do that at the same time we're balancing the needs of the insurance model or the impairment-based model? And we emerged out the other end with what we have right now. And and I think that because we did it small and we built that momentum, and we were able to have some results that we made good on, going back to Terrence's point, like it's not all talk, it's not all my big ideas, it's a synthesis of a bunch of different things that really helped build that influence and build that momentum. And for right now, this is how I believe we're going to get the next 5, 10, 15% positive increase in our outcomes. It doesn't have much to do with the economy necessarily, and we've shown that. It also doesn't have much to do with the fact that we are a monopolistic or exclusive state fund. And in a lot of ways, this work is much harder to do it in an environment like ours, because we don't have the luxury of not underwriting people when they don't want to play ball the way we want to play. So for me, it was inclusion and bringing a lot of people in that traditionally your organization may not bring in to help you solve some of those issues and reimagine and rebuild some of your tools and processes to really achieve that greater good.
Thanks, Ryan. We do have a question from the audience and want to have the panelists speak to that. So has anyone faced resistance from people due to being so young? And if so, how do you handle that? Or not just maybe so young, but being from a different perspective. Christina, you want to take that first?
Yeah, and so I can represent two areas here. When I first led a sports association, I was their executive director, by far the youngest person in the room, and working for a board that was all white and almost all male. So here I am, a young 30-something woman leading a board and helping to advance their governance structure. And so there are a few areas here. One of them is, I think, being assertive and confident. So it's almost like the duck analogy, right? Like on the surface, everything looks calm and you look like you're organized and you know what you're doing, but in reality, you may have no idea what you are doing. We've all been there, but you ask the right questions and you get the right information, and ultimately you're like, I'm here for a reason. I've already earned my spot here. And it just so turned out that in many situations, I was the most expert in an area around a topic around governance, because these board members have never even served on boards before, but I'd been leading boards for, some time. So I think about why you're there, and be confident in your role, and don't be afraid to sometimes ask the dumb questions, and ask them in a place where you feel like you can have trust and understand what that means. Then I'll also add this, which is a little tip I learned, which is many times this is all about creating the perspective and sort of thought that we're all very similar. There is some similarities between us here. So for example, I would start doing things and mimicking some of those other leaders so they could see me as one of their own. And those are things like, if I had a good conversation with someone or they made a connection for me, I started donating to like the foundations and organizations that they personally donated to. For example, I'd meet with an exec from another foundation who was leading something, and she put me in touch with the next person to like advance something. So I donated to her foundation, and it was $20. This is not like thousands of dollars, but put in her name and said, thank you for your time. Here's a donation to your industry. I thanked Scott when he made that connection to me. And for them to see someone gave money or recognition to them that they didn't prompt showed not only I was listening and paying attention, but paying it forward.
Great example. Anyone else want to take that question though? Terrence.
Yeah, so I've been there too. I mean, that was a long time ago in my career when I was the youngest person in the room, and it's hard. I think, Christina, you said it. It's really hard. The confidence piece really helps, but I'll also give you the perspective of this from a leadership perspective. It's usually the people who have the least experience that ask the right questions, in my experience, because they're asking you, so why did you do this for 20 years? Like, why? And a lot of times we're uncomfortable because we don't really have the answer. And we're really thinking through, yeah, that's a good question. Now, how do I respond to that? But it's recognize that you are bringing a lot to the table. Just because I've been doing this job for 20 plus years doesn't mean I know everything. Actually, there's probably a lot of things that I assume I know that I don't know. And when my experience, it's the people who are new, the people who are younger that have actually come in and said, what about this? Have you thought about doing this? And really change the way we've approached problems and come up with solutions. So I think it's not really asking the dumb questions, it's asking questions, just asking why, and really pushing people to answer those questions and getting them to, and if you're not comfortable with the answer, it's okay to ask again. Yeah, that didn't really, can you maybe help me understand a little bit better, because I'm not sure I fully understand, or something along those lines. And it really helps drive that conversation, because I think that's what the value you bring. Jen, you're on mute.
I'm on mute, the phrase of the pandemic. I wanted to ask Amanda, did you want to share any closing thoughts on influence and these opportunities to build it?
Yeah, I just want to share a little bit on mentorship, and just noting that there are a lot of ways to be a mentor or to seek out a mentor. And a lot of people think of those one-on-one opportunities, internal opportunities within their company, professional organizations. I'll put a plug in for the Transition Mentorship Program here as we close out. Big brother, big sister community opportunities. There's so many ways where you can do that one-on-one type of mentorship. Also, mentorships go both directions. Reverse mentoring is kind of the term used for, younger to mentor somebody that's maybe in their mid or late career, but it goes both directions, and it should. And if you're building those careers or building those opportunities and those friendships, you may get to a point where you have a career champion, as Christina talked about, a career mentor, somebody that you have as a lifelong trusted insider. So there are lots of reasons to start building these, and a lot of reasons to seek out these relationships that go way beyond even building influence. It will help you in so many ways. So I just want to end on that thought.
Thanks, Amanda. And Ryan, will you share a closing thought as well?
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of pick up the torch, so to speak, on what I heard in the last transitions conversation, which is this challenge that you hear people like Bob Wilson put out there about really changing the narrative of our industry, and developing and fostering that just cause or that greater good. So a lot of these other concepts have a home and a context in which they can fall into place and build and grow that momentum. And so I don't see a lot of it in our industry, unfortunately. There's a couple that have taken that risk and renamed their unit the Workers Recovery Unit, for example, with Dr. Muselman, or you have Bob Wilson out there talking about workers recovery and rebranding what it is we do. And I think, you know, in Washington, and even with the IA changing recently the name of the committee from the Disability Management and Return to Work Committee to the Work Disability Prevention and Return to Work Committee, is really important stuff. And I think that that kind of change of the narrative is what's going to be necessary to attract the right kind of people into our industry, as we reimagine what the next generation is going to look like, so they can actually get back to the roots of what it is we should be doing as work comp, which is helping people out.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for that closing thought. And I just, we're here at the hour, and I want to take this opportunity to thank Christina, Amanda, Terrence, and Ryan for sharing their thoughts and perspectives. A couple of things that I took away is that we do have to reshape, reimagine our industry to attract the next generation of talent. And once we have attracted them, it's really important that we as peers and colleagues and managers and leaders be intentional about giving them opportunities to develop and grow their own influence. And I encourage you to reflect on how influence has helped each of you be successful throughout your own career, and start brainstorming opportunities to build influence in achieving your next career goals. I want to remind the audience that the Transitions is posting content as well as has information about its mentorship program on their LinkedIn page. You just go to the Transitions and subscribe, and you'll be able to access all of the information. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It was wonderful to have this conversation, and I wish everyone a happy spring. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thanks, Jen.